welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas to help us solve some of society's biggest problems, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we're going to be looking at the pros and cons of Trump running the government, not so much like a business, but as like an activist, investor, and mafia boss rolled into one, by having the country take ownership stakes in large companies like NVIDIA and Intel in exchange for government favors. And the range of reactions to these moves are actually quite fascinating. So we're going to go through a fair number of them from right to left. Spoiler alert, basically everyone hates what Trump is doing just for different reasons. And so that's why it's interesting. And I'm going to be issuing a challenge today to the three of you on this show with me. Are you ready to be challenged?
Yeah.
Are you excited to be challenged?
Ready? No. Excited? Absolutely.
I never know with you, so we'll see.
We'll see. The challenge is that I would like for us to have a conversation with more nuance than Time Magazine was able to muster in their ideas piece.
Okay.
Which is just a fancy way of saying opinion because they're fancy and full of refined ideas over Time.
Yeah.
Their article, The Danger of Trump Seizing Private Companies, essentially begins with a very normal, very thoughtful comparative analysis of economic systems by quoting two people, Ayn Rand, the hero to multiple generations of intellectually stunted men who read her books in high school and then nothing else ever, except other people saying how right she was about everything, and then went on to dedicate their lives to being selfish sociopaths while calling it virtuous. And the other person they quoted is Chairman Mao, the Chinese dictator who had some socialist ideas, but made the mistake of trying to implement them while being a dictator. Whoops, because that's never a way to implement good ideas or bad ideas or any ideas, and ended up killing millions of people with a famine. So they're off to a good start, like thoughtful, nuanced, timely also, timely references.
Right, super timely.
That they pulled. So look, I don't even remember what like most of that article talked about. It's like mostly garbage, but that's how it started. And I really just wanted to read the last line by these, very reasonable, thoughtful writers who are here to calmly explain why, anything other than market fundamentalism is a bad idea. So they conclude the article with Milton Friedman, a pillar of genuine conservative economic thought, warned in his 1990 book, Free to Choose, quote, "The combination of economic and political power in the same hands is a sure recipe for tyranny," end quote. And the last line of the article, "Perhaps Trump should give it a read." Huh? Nice stinger. I love a good flourish and a good stinger at the end of an article. And like, do you see what they did there? They were like, did we solve it? I think we solved it.
Oh, they took our thing.
If Trump just realized that what he was doing is going to lead to tyranny, he's going to be like, oh no, I never meant to do that. I'm so sorry, everyone. Tyranny, that's the worst. I would never.
After reading that, I thought this whole episode is just us going to be angry and against Time Magazine, because I thought I don't know if I can do this one. This is what are we doing here? But Jay had a plan.
I too am surprised though at the playfulness of it. I did not realize we were going to have so much fun. So I like the attitude.
Oh, great. I mean, like, you're free to get angry too. I mean, if you want to bring that kind of energy, like you can do that too.
I think I'm basically going to be repeating the same thing over and over again throughout the show. And, I won't say it right now just to not belabor it.
Huh? Suspense.
That's what's going to happen.
Okay, next up, we are continuing with the libertarians. This is the Cato Institute responding. Their headline is Trump's state capitalism, a hybrid between socialism and capitalism, won't make America great again. And look, like I've been on the record for years saying that libertarians are like, they tend to be right about half the time. The other half, they are batshit crazy, but half the time they're okay. So kind of to that point, this article begins, quote, in 1982, the gifted libertarian Roy A. Childs Jr. warned that the American New Right was working to build a populist authoritarian movement hostile to free markets and committed to some form of managed economy. 43 years later, Donald Trump is president, and the Wall Street Journal's chief economics commentator describes his policies as state capitalism and a hybrid between socialism and capitalism in which the state guides the decisions of nominally private enterprises, end quote. And look, like these libertarian articles, I don't mind so much. We actually didn't pull any like Trump supporting far right stuff. The libertarians, like, we don't agree with where they're coming from or where they want to go, but they have their perspectives, and calling it sort of a hybrid state capitalism is, it makes way more sense than those who are calling Trump a socialist, mostly for shock value or because they don't know what they're talking about. So the libertarians are more headed in the right direction in terms of right-wing critics of Trump.
Okay, this is my first time saying it. You could just make companies pay more in taxes. You could use regulations. You could use legislation. You could do all sorts of things to make sure that you are getting something from the investment that the country is putting in, whether it be research or anything else, or infrastructure. These companies obviously benefit from government investment, and you could use the tools we already have to get what Trump says he wants out of it. And you could actually help people at the same time. But since there is no will to help anybody, it's just a grift. And that is what I'm going to keep saying over and over again. This is all a fucking grift.
I thought we were going to do nuance because you sound like a dirty commie to me, like right now. It's like taxing corporations? Are you out of your mind? How would that work?
How would that work? You're right.
They'll all just leave. They'll leave immediately. None of them will stay.
That's right.
I think we've been asking ourselves, what line is there that they're going to start pushing back on Trump? And shocker, it happens to be at the capitalist line. When I was doing recent research for an episode on Best of the Left podcast,
wherever you get your podcast,
one of the things that I found I had to be careful about was the FTC firing commentary, because when it comes to central banking and the global impact, there was pushback from like the libertarian branch, some of the conservative branch. So I had to be careful and like what critique it was taking. And some of them got me. I would be listening for a little bit. Like, is this a progressive talking? And then inevitably they would slide in that necessary free market capitalist talking point. But it is good to know there is a line. It's just not a great one.
So Deon said something a few episodes back about how Trump sees the country as his and therefore the money as his. He doesn't actually see it as government money. So when he's talking about investing in these companies, he's talking about himself. And actually, I think later on another article it mentions that they even put his name on the investment paperwork, not just that the US government was investing, but that Donald Trump himself was listed in this paperwork. Now, he doesn't have any power, but he's listed because they need to appeal to his ego. And this is why he's building a $200 million ballroom at the White House. I think the critics here are framing this as though he's doing something strategic and thoughtful, like that he has some sort of theory that ties everything together. And he doesn't at all. It is all about him. It is all about his ego. It is all about making sure that he feels powerful. And so even critiquing it from any sort of political ideology standpoint is difficult because it's not about that for him. And that's why he's pissing off his own party by doing this, because he doesn't really care about conservative ideology. He cares about how he looks and how he feels.
Yes, and multiple of these articles points out accurately that Trump does not have a coherent economic vision for what he's doing.
Right.
But because they seem to only be able to speak in economic terms, they are then left like baffled. So this is a better quote. I'm skipping ahead to a reason.com article, also libertarian leaning. And it says, Trump's approach isn't part of any coherent vision. It's just transactional. He looks at it in isolation, and if he believes it's a good deal, he does it. But again, what these people who spend all their time thinking about the glory of free markets can't seem to understand is the authoritarianism right in front of their faces.
Mm-hmm.
Trump doesn't have a coherent economic theory, but he does have a coherent vision of himself in total control over
Right.
everything. That's his coherent theory. And all these libertarians and right-wingers who are like, oh, but it's so confusing that he would do this because it's going to be bad for the economy. Doesn't he realize? Dude, that's not what he's about.
No, he
He's not
doesn't
about
care.
helping other people. He's about enriching himself. But even more important than enriching himself is just him being in control. That's it.
Yep.
He just wants to be the one to do the thing.
In fact, along those lines, have you noticed that everything he's announced in the last 9 months, he is in charge of, whether it be the Kennedy Center
He doesn't want to be there.
or, right, he doesn't, well,
That's what he says.
I mean, he wants to be in charge of the Kennedy Center. I think he does. I think that's actually where his heart is, as we've said on the
Right.
show before. But the other stuff, it's like whenever there's a new little position that he's created, sort of accidentally, it seems, he's like, and I'm going to be in charge of it. And it's just all about having his feelings. Well, it's about making him feel adequate. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're going to psychologically dissect it.
Oh, and we of course are, because that is the thing that I think a lot of these articles don't mention is the psychological aspect. It makes perfect sense when you recognize him for his personality disorder. Like, he is a narcissist, so sometimes he will help people, but it has nothing to do with the people
Yeah.
he's helping.
Accidentally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
lot of these moves have to do with ego. It has to do with the centering. And it doesn't have to make coherent sense. It doesn't actually have to be a good deal as long as he can talk about it and then go back to his base who will cheer him on for that thing. Yeah. The psychological is so important, but obviously missing.
The psychological aspect of these writers not being able to see that. I think it's important for all of us to like always examine our own blind spots or try to see that maybe we have blind spots somewhere, somehow. And reading all these articles and them not being able to make this connection, this very obvious to us connection that Trump doesn't have anyone's best interest at heart, because they do think that the country should be run like a business. They also don't make the connection that Trump is a terrible businessman. Trump was a failing businessman. And if anyone on earth should be running the country like a business, it shouldn't be Donald Trump. He's failed over and over, like bankrupting
King
casinos.
of bankruptcies.
Yeah, it's comical that they can't see that this man who is incompetent, who has been incompetent, doesn't have any principles other than I want money for me. That's his whole driving force. Can't say that because they don't want it to seem that maybe running the country like a business just in general is a bad idea, because that's what they want to do. So if this guy that they've propped up as king businessman is running the country terribly by doing the things that they think they want, they have to work around it to somehow finesse it to where he's actually not doing the thing that they want, when really he's doing the things that they want. Just, it's not going to work.
So I don't think that they would agree that, for instance, taking ownership stakes in businesses is what they want. The problem with business is that there's an enormous difference between the theoretical concept of a business being run in an economy where there are strict rules that have to be followed, and how businesses actually get run, which is bumping into every rule they can and seeing what they can get away with. So actual businesses in the actual world go over regulations. They test their limits. Maybe they have to pay a fine. Maybe they realize that the fines they pay are actually worth it because they profited so much from breaking the rules. So if you run the country like an actual business, then Trump is doing that. He's running the country like an actual business that doesn't give a shit about rules and regulations, is going to push beyond what is reasonable, push beyond what is good for society for the sake of what is his own perceived top benefits, which is profit and glory for himself. And if the country loses out, like if we take some investment in Intel and Intel doesn't turn around and that investment turns out to be a flop, Trump doesn't lose anything for that. And he still gets to like say that he's a great deal maker, you know? And that's all that really matters. So
Yeah.
this is the problem with people who have free market fundamentalism and they think that government should be run the same way, is that your fantasy of how corporations run is not usually in line with how they actually run, unless there's extremely strict regulation that they are also opposed to. Corporations can run better with strict rules and incredibly harsh enforcement so that they have to stay within the rules. Then they're going to stop breaking the rules, and that creates a fair playing ground for everyone. But those who believe in free market fundamentalism also don't want there to be regulation. And so then they're actually in favor of cheating, which benefits the biggest corporations, or, I mean, as we're going to get deeper into the conversation, governments are acting as capitalist entities. They invest like investors do. So corporations can be enormous and capture regulators to allow them to do whatever they want, squeeze out small companies, make it so that they can never compete, buy them out, whatever. And governments are sort of doing the same thing. So this crony, corrupt capitalism is what anyone who opposes regulation, like this is what you're in favor of. And so in a sense, Trump is doing what they won't admit they are in favor of, but what they are inevitably supporting with the policies they
And
support.
that definitely explains part of the blind spot aspect too. They have this vision that isn't real. Like I said, everyone has blind spots. We all do. But when you do have this much power and your blind spot can't see that your vision for the country is the country's entire ruin, then maybe do some self-examination before you cite Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand and Mao.
Like, what a group.
But continuing with the libertarians, things get more interesting when they start to really fret about where this is all heading. And so speaking about problems that they say arise when the state meddles too much in private enterprise, it says, quote, to remedy the problem, the government intervenes again and again, which only compounds the chaos and unrest, all the while blaming capitalism and market failures. Mises calls this the path to socialism by installments. Dun, dun, dun. And I'm like, oh, I'm listening. How's that going to work exactly? Like all of a sudden I'm excited, because if the libertarian free market fundamentalists are afraid not just that he's going to ruin the economy, but that he's going to pave the way to socialism, then like, I'm going to pay attention to that. That's exciting. And on the political front, points out that, says, quote, now that Mr. Trump has crossed the Rubicon, Republicans will have no objection to the federal government expanding state ownership of companies. Lawmakers will soon argue that if chips and steel are too important to leave to free markets, food and medicine are as well. Oh, no.
I also, like, I fucking wish, right? Like, that's, I think that is the most optimistic view from a libertarian of how progressives will take this and use it. I wish that that would happen, but it's not going to happen. That's insane.
Isn't it funny, though, that both their examples are exactly things that we would want to actually be socialized?
Yeah.
They're so close. So close.
And are they saying it right? You know, are they saying food and medicine right now because those are two of the things that are major factors in the affordability crisis that we're having? And Zohran Mamdani wants to have city-owned grocery stores, and there are fights to get medicine to be more affordable. I don't know that those were just toss away lines there. I think they're like, hey, don't get too excited because, that's bad. That can be scary and, a road to serfdom, for God's sakes.
No, I think you're right that it's
Mhm.
intentional. I absolutely think those things are in the sphere. It's just, how are you going to convince someone this is bad when those are your examples?
Yeah.
Right.
It is just fascinating that their biggest fears are our wish list. We couldn't be more
Yeah.
opposed in our views because
Yeah.
we've never actually done this. We've never actually done the thing that they're so terrified of. It would be cool if maybe they'd let us do it and say, "See, it's gonna fail," and let us fail. Let
Right.
us
Let us
try it
Let's try.
and see how badly it fails, and then we'll go back to imaginary free market capitalism.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that the article starts with a correct assessment of what was happening. So this apparently gifted libertarian, Roy A. Childs Jr., warning about populist authoritarian movement. Like the new right is
Yeah.
working to build a populist authoritarian movement. And by the end of the article, we are wringing our hands and screaming about socialism by
Yep.
installments. That is a interesting journey that we just went on. And don't you think populist authoritarian movement sounds scarier to me than socialism by installments? But I guess that's not their primary concern.
Well, I think that's like Jay's, their 50-50 kind
Yeah.
of commentary, because
Mhm.
you're right. They
Mhm.
nailed it with the assessment and then it just evolved from there, which
Yeah.
is why we disagree
I mean,
with their vision for the future.
and another thing I try to say as often as possible is that it's a lot easier to recognize the problems than accurately find
Uh-huh.
a good answer. People make themselves, I mean, particularly on social media, which is why we're here to be smarter than them. A lot of people make themselves sound smart to young people just coming to the world. These people sound smart because they accurately identify problems. And then people get tricked into thinking, well, whatever their solution is must be right too. And that is very much not the case. So these libertarians continue. And I do think that they have, some, again, about 50-50. They have some fair points about if government meddling in private corporations goes too far, what can happen? So here's what the libertarians have to say about it. It says, quote, soon, companies learn that success depends less on innovation or competition than on currying political favor. Resources shift from productive activities to lobbying, undermining both fairness and growth. Because these actions are purely transactional, they entrench the worst aspects of state capitalism: politicized resource allocation, favoritism for the well connected, and erosion of the rule of law. End quote. And so to connect to these thoughts, I'm skipping ahead to a leftist perspective that has some agreements with this. So this is from the American Prospect article, What State Capitalism Can Do and What It Can't. And they say they're also speaking about problems with government meddling, too much in government, but from their perspective, it's for the sake of progressive outcomes rather than profit that the libertarians were focused on. So the American Prospect says, quote, I think such issues are better addressed by legislation that affects every company rather than singling out one-offs for socially responsible conduct. State capitalism has its place in certain instances of market failure. A mixed public-private company may well be the best short-term remedy. But market failures are endemic to and inherent in capitalism and are better addressed by regulation, public enterprise, and industrial policy than they are by the hybrid halfway houses of state capitalism. We certainly can do state capitalism better than Donald Trump can, but there are more effective ways to build a thriving, more egalitarian economy. End quote.
Exactly. Again, that's why I started off by saying regulations, tax code, like these things are powerful tools. The problem is that lobbyists and corporate interests have eroded our tools and the public has gone along with it. But if we actually use these tools and also antitrust legislation and tools to make the playing field fair, and of course, what we are really focusing in on here is make things better for people. This is not a theoretical game of CEOs playing some sort of, inside baseball and seeing who can make the most money. The actual thing we need to be focused on is, how does any of this benefit people? And it doesn't. And again, this is a grift. And why is it a grift? Because they're using your tax dollars to quote unquote invest in these companies, and you are not getting anything in return. In fact, right now they are talking, or they have removed subsidies for your healthcare premiums that were helping millions of people. They have cut Medicaid and Medicare, and rural hospitals are suffering. So it'd be one thing, like, we could have a more interesting conversation if any of this actually came back to benefit people. But while they are investing your taxpayer dollars, they are cutting the services and things that people rely on simultaneously. And Trump's building a fucking ballroom. I'll say it again. Like, that is the grift. That is the grift. You are getting fleeced. And any propaganda about how this is somehow flooding the coffers of the United States Treasury is bullshit, because they are taking things away from you at the same time and giving tax breaks to the 1%.
This is where our paths completely diverge, is because what is their goal? What do they really want? They don't want a level playing field. I think that's the theory or whatever, like a rising tide rises all ships or whatever nonsense that they believe. But we've been doing the libertarian version of this economic plan for 40 plus years now. Like Milton Friedman, he won. We've been doing that. And this is where we're at. That's why we're here right now, to where a populist authoritarian can be in office, because he did correctly assess the problem. Well, not Trump didn't assess the problem. I don't want to give him any credit for that. But he did correctly say that there was a problem with the economy, and people did flock to that because we all feel it. And what we're feeling is the effects of 40 years of this libertarian, let corporations, laissez-faire capitalism just run wild. Regulations, let's get rid of those. Let's limit them. Let's let businesses run up against all the rules and just find them and not take them over when they destroy the economy. 2008, as an example, they kind of gloss over that, sometimes when the market fails, it's okay for the government to intervene. The government should have done way more on the helping people side and not pumping up bank side for trying to destroy the economy by being greedy.
Or maybe they shouldn't have been allowed to do that at all,
Right.
because we should have had a robust system in place to control their greediness.
And it would have been a wonderful time to realize that, okay, this is a failure. We're not doing it right. We should have maybe more socialism, maybe in increments. Maybe we could have started in increments in 2008, but we haven't. We're not doing that. And this isn't that either. This game, this grift, it's been being played on us for decades at this point. And this is where we're at, where an authoritarian madman can be president, and they still are trying to rationalize why he should be.
Yeah.
You just said that in a way that made me think, like, in America, where anything is possible, even a madman can become president.
Dream big.
Well, okay, so zeroing in more on Trump's sort of madman belief that he is the country. I mean, this is what all dictators end up, feeling like. He owns the country. He owns the money. It is him and his. And this is from BBC. It's Trump's brand of U.S. capitalism faces, quote, socialist backlash from conservatives. But that's not what I'm focusing in on from this article. They do quote people saying that he's being socialist while not really knowing what that means. But then we get to this quote. It says, another Trump economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, suggested a larger plan, that these kinds of government interventions are the first step toward creating a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. The president has frequently admired the investment funds directed by other nations, such as China and monarchies in the Gulf, as an effective means of generating government revenue, end quote. And I was just like, oh no, but once he realizes that China and the Gulf monarchies are authoritarian states, he's going to be so embarrassed. He's going to realize like, oh no, I'm doing an authoritarian thing. I didn't mean to do that.
Trump's never been embarrassed in his entire life. Will it start now?
Or is he embarrassed every single day?
Well, yes. The little child inside him is embarrassed every single day. Yes, that's true.
So the sovereign wealth funds are more complicated. They're not purely evil. I did think it was interesting that the BBC focused on, and because I bet Trump has actually pointed to China and Gulf monarchies as like, oh, you guys are doing great things. Like, has he ever complimented Norway on their sovereign wealth fund and its like democratic controls? I'm guessing not.
Actually, when I read Sovereign Wealth Fund, Norway was the first one I thought of. I didn't even think about the other places. And I thought, okay, if he really wants to sell it, then that would be the better way to go. But he's not even aware. There's a line in here. I don't know which Trump idiot said it, but talking about how Lockheed Martin makes 97% of their revenue from the federal government. If we're adding fundamental value to your business, I think it's fair for Donald Trump to think about the American people, right? That's the justification. And here we have military contractors. Obviously, they're making money from the government. Obviously, that's like the whole situation. And they basically want them to give profits back. They want us to profit off of our own military industrial complex. But not only that, I mean, they are sending the military to our cities to assault our people. So I don't know, maybe ask some people in Appalachia if trying to gin up liberal tears by harassing and terrifying innocent people is better than being able to afford healthcare or better than their rural hospital being open. This idea that this is great, we're going to get something out of this. Meanwhile, again, while they strip things away, the things that actually help people, and then have the audacity to say that you're going to benefit from us taking a cut of Lockheed Martin's profits. I mean, not only is it so cyclical that it doesn't even make sense in terms of the money and where it's going, but also they are using our tax dollars, our military against us right now. Why would anyone be on board with this? And we're using it to commit genocide in another country.
Genuine question. I don't know, other than the obvious racism and attacking the other. What are they saying is going to be done for the American people? Is there something on offer?
Details don't.
But I mean that legitimately. Like when people on the right are like, yeah, all this stuff. Is it just because the military is attacking them, which is the awful people, when ICE is attacking them, not us? Is that all that they are expecting? Do they believe that this money will somehow go to a program that they like? Do they think that there should be no programs at all? I don't understand the average Trump voters' mentality just in general, but like this one specifically, like what do they think they're getting out of it? Like when they hear that Trump says that they're thinking about the American people, okay, you thought about them, now what?
Right. Well, that's the thing. That's why I say, like, are the liberal tears, the we schooled and own the libs, is that enough? I actually don't think it is in the long term. In the short term, maybe, sure, because I know there are a bunch of Trump supporters just drooling about what's happening in places like Chicago and Portland and DC, but that's not a long-term thing. So at some point, they're going to have to offer something else, right? Because otherwise, no one's going to be on board with that.
So they did. We just don't have the right mind frame to like calculate it as such, because we also don't buy into the lies. It has to do with taxes. Paying less taxes, not getting more, just having to pay into these systems less. That is what they're looking for.
But of course, that only applies to the top 1%.
But that's not what's being said.
Again.
That's
right.
They definitely believe that they're going to. I think back to when Elon was out in whatever rally.
I was just gonna.
Yeah. And that woman asked, "Are we expecting a check from Doge?" Like, so I do think that people expect a return.
And he said no.
Yeah, but it is in the form of, I'm not going to have to pay as much taxes because we're cutting out all this bullshit. And if only
Right.
that were true. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
need to pay less taxes. I need my taxes to go towards actual things that help me and my neighbors. But
Mhm.
there are people who want to pay less taxes. So cutting the waste to them just signals that, even though that's not reality.
Exactly, Erin. That is exactly what I was thinking. And like, I think that when people imagine, well, obviously, if they cut expenses, we're going to get something in return. Like, we'll like literally get money back in our pockets. They expect that because that would actually be logical. That would be reasonable. In fact, I thought Trump and Elon would cut checks because I thought they would do that as part of their populist, really get people to love them because someone got a check with Donald Trump's signature on it again, like they did during COVID, right? Which helped him a lot, sadly. So, like, I absolutely thought that's what they would do. And the fact that they haven't is actually kind of stunning because they are not giving people anything that they would expect.
Yeah, I mean, they passed the tax cut bill that mostly goes to billionaires
Right.
and a little bit goes to lower income people, but they're more than overpaying for that with the cost of tariffs. But they didn't know that, and they still don't know why. And the cost of goods due to tariffs can still be like, should I be mad at corporations instead of Trump? Because it's probably not Trump's fault because foreign companies are paying the tariffs. That can't
Right.
come
That can't
back
be
to
right.
me. People are very confused about that.
And yet
So they're
things are
like,
so expensive. Gosh.
So there's a couple
well,
things like that I've been thinking for a while. They are operating as if they will never be out of office, except
Hmm.
for this bill that passed. The most damaging effects happen after November
Yep.
2026. So I don't think they fully are able to do the end of democracy, end of voting thing yet. That does seem like the way they're operating, but they also have like this lingering, yeah, but we might still have to win another election. So, in the meantime, while not offering anything, they do want the worst of it to come after the midterms.
Although I think they're going to get real surprised by the reaction to the healthcare subsidies getting cut. I mean, that is going to screw everyone, not just the people who are getting the subsidies. And that's starting to be talked about in a bigger way right now, to the point where Trump is actually kind of playing with the idea of at least talking about it, because I think he realizes this is politically extremely damaging. But man, they wanted those subsidies to go away as soon as possible. And so they didn't wait on that one. I'm shocked. I'm really shocked they didn't wait on that one for after the midterms.
Because AOC recently said she was wrong about the authoritarians being criminal masterminds or geniuses. Like they're really not that bright. They're just
Yeah.
they're
Oh boy.
focused. They've got a plan, but it may not be a great one.
Mhm.
That's probably the problem with just doing a grab all. You're literally trying to
Mhm.
drain everything as quickly as possible, benefit all the elites, tap into that oligarchy, and it's not popular. Like
No.
Trump, I
Yeah.
think, is shielded because I mean, we have him, like him or not, for several more years, but definitely in Congress, they're going to start feeling the pressure. I just don't know that it will be enough.
we are now definitely turning to the left in the analysis. And this is from Thomas Piketty, author of Capital in the 21st Century, from this article, Trump, National Capitalism at Bay. And Piketty says, quote, "The dream of prosperity promised by national capitalism always ends up disappointing public expectations because it is, in reality, built on exacerbated social hierarchies and an ever-growing concentration of wealth." And I was like, oh no, when Trump realizes that he's just like completely accidentally going to concentrate even more wealth into the hands of the already wealthy, he's going to have like such egg on his face. Like someone should let him know. They're like, oh, you should read up on this, sir.
Mm.
And then Piketty continues, quote, If the Republican Party has become so nationalistic and virulent toward the outside world, it is first and foremost due to the failure of Reagan-era policies, which were supposed to boost growth, but only slowed it and led to stagnating incomes for most, end quote. Which is just a short way of saying the birth of neoliberalism that we've been living with ever since the Reagan era.
We've been doing what they wanted to do for decades.
Yeah. It does feel, I mean, it doesn't help anything, but it does feel nice to know that at least people who care and are thoughtful recognize that that is the beginning of everything we're living through now. That's very clarifying. And there's been tons of graphs made showing how wages dropped and corporate profits flew up and unions were crushed and all of the stuff that shows that pattern happening over the 80s and 90s. And what I think is pathetic that we are still dealing with is we have yet to see opposition to that project. And we're desperate for it, and we have been desperate for it. And here we are 9 months into Trump's second and very authoritarian term, and Democrats are still lost in the fucking woods trying to figure out what's going on, with very few exceptions. And I think there is a very clear alternative message to be had here, and it is people first. Because, look, America first, America just means corporations at this point. It doesn't mean anybody else. It means the rich, it means the elite, it means corporations. It doesn't mean you. It doesn't mean you. People first policies, things that will actually benefit people, reduce their cost of living, help make things more affordable, improve their quality of life, their health, all of these things. That is an easy message. It is not rocket science. Point out, and I'm talking to Democrats, point out why and how all these things do not help people. In fact, they make it worse. They make your lives worse. People can understand that. It's very clear. Tell them it's a grift. Tell them this is bullshit, that they're pulling things away from you while claiming they're filling the coffers of the United States government. That message is not hard. And we've been doing this a long time. So the fact that we don't have that ready to go and fired up is pathetic. It is fucking pathetic.
It's difficult to do, revisionist history with things like the 2008 market crash. That was the logical end of the Reagan era economic policy. Instead of moving forward and doing something like Amanda just said, like a people first policy, what the Obama administration did was put some band-aids on the Reagan era and kept it going. Yep. And now we're at the point where the band-aids aren't working anymore. So are we going to be in a Trump era for a long time, or will this fail? Who knows? But it is my biggest frustration with Obama, but also at the same time realizing that a man named Barack Hussein Obama, who was already dealing with all kinds of things, to then completely change the global order and economy might have been too much too soon. Whether he even wanted to do that, that's a whole nother issue. Like, I doubt it, because It seems like the Democratic Party is the capitalist party, maybe a softer, friendlier capitalist party, but it's a capitalist party. So they didn't have the tools ready to fix the problem at hand. And they still don't. And that's the scary part. As a party, they don't. There are members of the party, and I think with Zoran being a national figure at this point, it will spawn more Zoran types, especially if he wins. And it does seem like he's going to, because Andrew Cuomo is a ghoul. But that is the way forward. However, did we miss our chance? Did we miss the boat? Are we going to be in this Trump era for whoever knows how long? Because, I mean, the Republican Party, the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025, they have a plan. They have a long-term plan, and they're implementing it terribly, but they are implementing it right now.
Next up, the New Republic is concerned that Democrats will let this opportunity slip through their fingers. So that was a good transition to this conversation, Deon. And the headline is, Democrats don't let Trump define what state capitalism can be. And looking back again at sovereign wealth funds, when not run by authoritarian states, as we alluded to. It says, quote, state enterprises account for over 20% of the largest companies in the world and include iconic companies like Renault, Mercedes-Benz, and Sweden's green steelmakers. Sovereign wealth funds of Norway, Alaska, and other jurisdictions now control more assets than hedge funds and private equity firms combined and include the planet's top holders of private stock, end quote. And this is just to point out that just like with most things, sovereign wealth funds aren't inherently good or evil. I'm not surprised that Trump would be more likely to praise the wealth funds managed by China and Middle Eastern monarchies as opposed to Norway. But that just goes to show, like, it is all about how you manage it. Like, it depends how it's managed, if there's democratic control, if people are benefiting from it, what safeguards are in place to prevent corruption, all those things. And the driving force of all of the fretting free market fundamentalists that we've been reading articles from today, they were all warning that tampering with private enterprise may hamper profit. That was always the bottom line, warning that people wouldn't like it when they realized Trump was going to hurt their profits or lead to socialism. Of course, the implication being that that would also hurt their profits. But this article goes on to point out that, quote, the climate crisis, called the biggest market failure in history, will require massive amounts of government intervention to address, end quote. So it should be just the most obvious thing in the world to anyone who is not an absolute ideologue in favor of free markets that we are going very fast in the wrong direction when it comes to one of the most critical issues humanity is facing. And what has to be done is, if not break, alter the path of the profit motive in our capitalist system. And the only way to do that is by the state taking action. So that could be state investments, sovereign wealth funds. It can be regulation. Obviously, like, it needs to be sort of an all of the above strategy. But allowing capitalism to do what it's going to do, allowing corporations to do what they're going to do, and hope that it gets turned around is nonsensical, to say the least. So it goes on to describe a bit more about sovereign wealth funds, saying, quote, state involvement in industry, if poorly regulated, can lead to corruption and capture. In the United States, for example, defense contracts and bailouts have been manipulated for private gain, but corruption is not inevitable. It depends on design and norms. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, with its transparency rules, and Germany's federalist consultative economic transition strategy, with its structured oversight, show that public investment can be managed accountably and in the public interest, which brings us back to the choices being made today, end quote. So we can do things differently, and we don't even have to invent it from scratch. The US is not functioning in the same way that every other capitalist country is.
Yeah.
Like, there's a huge spectrum. There are a lot of lessons we can learn. There's already experimentation happening, and all we have to do is overcome the hurdle that there is something in the world more important than profit, and agreeing that, continued habitability of the planet we all depend on, like, that should be baseline, something easily understandable as more important. I would put a lot of other things on that list, like universal healthcare and other things that would impinge on people's profits. Sorry, but we need to do something that's people focused.
I think it's hard to imagine the people focus, just because as we move through this argument, the mindset and framing that come from the elites, I'm just going to say, I guess we'll
Mhm.
expand maybe not just 1%, but top 5%, how it's being reported on, how it's being phrased. I'm thinking about in the BBC article, there's a quote from, I believe, Stern, and he's talking about Trump always touting what a great business person he is. And the response to it is like, okay, you might be a great business person, but we have specialties in these fields. And that's why they're better equipped to run the business. And I just see the bullshit as that's being stated of like, what's their specialty? Like maximizing profits. The actual specialty is with the workers. And if you truly wanted a company that was good for all and that capitalized on those specialties, you would have workers on your board to help dictate, the future of the company based on their knowledge, not just maximizing profits. But of course, that would be
Ooh.
putting people first. That would be making decisions that benefit others besides just CEOs. Because, like, again, what is their specialty when it comes to businesses like that? Once you're at the top, you're so far removed from the actual work that's being done. But that mindset is so persistent that I don't know how you break through the wall.
Actually, Erin, on that point, exactly, you're making me think of how all those articles from libertarians are constantly hand-wringing about, you don't want the government to own the means of production, do you? That'd be terrible. Well, what about the workers owning the means of production? That's also terrible. Like, tell me why that's terrible, because I can kind of see, through the lens, some of your arguments for why the government maybe necessarily shouldn't be in charge of everything. But the people that are actually doing the work, the people with the skills, the people who like have an actual investment in the companies that they work for, how is that so terrible? And it's this idea that the only people who can own the means of production are the CEOs with their bajillions of dollars in salary, and they somehow are magically the ones who know what is right, when in reality, all they know is profit, make more profit, make more profit. That is the only quote unquote skill they have. And if we are fretting and wringing our hands about who's owning the means of production, I am wringing my hands about a single CEO who doesn't give a fuck about anyone but himself and money as being the person who owns the means of production. That is scary and threatening and not good, and it hasn't served us well at all, as we are seeing in this late stage capitalist society.
Well, and I have to believe that that framing is intentional because it is a lot harder to argue about why workers can't have a say.
Right.
It's a lot harder to combat bringing democracy into the workplace versus, oh, the government's going to control everything, because people do hate the government. Like, I think leftists and people on the right, like, we all
Right.
could come together and rant about the government and its failings, even when we disagree on how they failed. But when it comes to like actually making a case, like obscuring what socialism is and what we mean when we talk about like democratic socialism, for example, like that benefits their argument that people don't have a clear understanding.
Mhm. And they don't, because socialism is a scary word. And actually, it bothers me when I see the phrase like authoritarian socialism or autocratic socialism or any of these things, because I'm like, socialism doesn't even fit there, because as soon as you have an authoritarian in power, they are not helping the people. That is what happens. That is the result of having an authoritarian or an autocrat or a dictator. Like, their whole thing is about them and their cronies. They don't care about the people. So even using the word socialism in those phrases bothers me, because that is not, like, I know that's technically, by definition, according to the way we talk about economics and government structures, like what word needs to be there, but it doesn't make sense to me, because socialism is about helping people.
That's just generations at this point of the propaganda that we've had, that democracy equals capitalism and socialism equals dictatorship. Like, we've been sold that. It's such an easy label to put on it at this point, because the work has already been done. It is just in our culture. That's what we believe. We, for some reason, believe that a CEO deciding what a company does and having their money equal speech so that they have more say so in the government, that's democracy. It's completely backwards. And it kind of makes me think of that. What was it? I think it's Mark Fisher. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. I think that's what these people are doing in these, like the libertarians writing these articles. They're imagining the end of the world. That's what they're talking about. Like, this will be the end. We're all going to die because we're trying to end capitalism. And they just let us try it. Let's try our horrible. It's all going off the rails anyway. Just let us give this socialism a try. See what happens.
Yeah.
No. So to clarify this point, because it is a point I like to clarify as often as possible, is that the whole scam of equating democracy with capitalism is that they pretend that there's one spectrum to be dealt with, but there are two.
Mhm.
There is a spectrum that goes between capitalism and communism, and a different y-axis spectrum between democracy and authoritarianism. So you can have authoritarian capitalism, you can have authoritarian socialism, you can have democratic capitalism, although capitalism, the nature of it is to erode democracy. So that's dangerous, and that's where we are. And you can have democratic socialism. And oh man, like if only we had a rising movement or like someone who's been talking for decades about democratic socialism. It's like, how could we get the benefits of socialism without the drawbacks of authoritarianism? I don't know.
We'll never know.
We'll save that for a future solved. When if we can figure out how to solve that one, then I think we'll really be onto something.
And speaking of Bernie, because he's mentioned in one of these articles, and they're saying, you know, he was kind of encouraging Trump in his investments in these companies. And he wasn't encouraging Trump. He's doing what Bernie does best. He's trying to bring people in. He's saying, oh, if you think this is good, you should see my version of it. That's what he's really saying. And of course, he was encouraging Trump to do what he will never do, to make the point that he will never do it. He's saying, you should give something back to the people. And Trump will never do that. But Bernie is highlighting that fact by saying, yeah, like, I'm interested in this idea as long as the people are getting something, to expose the fact that Trump is not giving you anything. He is taking your stuff away.
So this article concludes, the one worrying that Democrats are going to let this opportunity slip through their fingers. And it just says, the United States has entered a new era of state capitalism. The real question is no longer whether the state will act, but whose interests it will serve. Will it merely prop up incumbents and invite capture, or can public ownership and golden shares be harnessed for resilience and equity? End quote. So again, interestingly, like this is why we're talking about both the libertarian articles and leftist articles, is they're basically saying the same thing. They're saying, we have entered a new era. This is interesting and scary, and there's kind of three ways to go. The libertarians think, well, like Trump is obviously leading us towards socialism. And the left, who are smarter than libertarians, are like, maybe, but we could just end up in a corrupt oligarchy of state capitalism and capture. So that's the worst scenario. That would be worse than the previous status quo, which was already bad, because that's just capitalism in a way that works even less for people than it already did, and works even more for consolidating wealth at the top than it already did. That's just putting that on hyperdrive. But it's also an opportunity to say, like, okay, so the door is clearly open. Activist governments is something that can happen. And Democrats, like we've been saying, they're in the wilderness. They're still confused. They're fumbling around. But the answers are presenting themselves. And there's plenty of discussion on the left about what Trump is doing right and wrong, what state capitalism can and can't do, what instances where it may be right for public enterprise to take action, but not everywhere. This is a nuanced and thoughtful movement proposing real concrete ideas. You know, Mamdani is suggesting city-run grocery stores, but he's not proposing the city take over all businesses. You know, that's the difference.
Yeah.
Is like we actually have nuanced takes on where targeted intervention makes sense.
And putting grocery stores in food deserts, not just putting them all over the place. Like that is the other nuance that never gets mentioned.
Right. And similarly, in the way that Medicare could fill the gaps. I mean, we obviously have gaps. There are millions of people without health insurance. And so Medicare is that type of system where, look, obviously we should have Medicare for all and universal coverage and no health insurance companies. But from where we are to where we want to be, at the very least, Medicare should be a public enterprise that anyone could buy into. If you can be a customer of a private insurance company, there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to be a customer of a government-run insurance system, bare minimum. And that system already exists. Again, you don't have to invent something new. But at the very least, that creates a new baseline of competition that the private insurance companies would have to compete against. So if they want your business, they have to be better than Medicare. And the propaganda is that they already are. Okay, well, then fucking prove it.
Yeah, they can't. Yeah, I just I don't know, we talk often about how the left has better ideas. And I say the left, not Democrats, because right now there is a battle here. And what corporate Democrats are offering is not what any of us are on board with. What we're on board with is you get healthcare, you get childcare, you get good roads, public transportation, social programs, safety nets, and you can get all of that without state capitalism. We don't have to do that even. We could actually have that. Where some other article was scared that, oh gosh, if we do this, then when a lefty comes in office, they're going to demand that the company be more green. That's what the fucking EPA was for. And it's being destroyed right now. This idea that if leftists get into power, we're going to use the tools of authoritarians to try to get what we want. We had already figured out at some points, not everything, but through things like the EPA, how to make sure that corporations were held in check. Now, has that worked perfectly? No. But it's way better than some of the alternatives, and it has done a lot. It's why we have clean air and water for the most part. That is being chipped away at by the Trump administration. Those effects won't come into view right away, but they will down the line. And I think that because the government is huge and people don't interact with it very often, they do think the things that we have that were making a difference, that were left ideas, that they take them for granted. And so they think that the government is just doing nothing and spending a bunch of money and it doesn't make my life any better. But we've been very, very insufficient on putting out the message about how the government does help you and does make your life better. And so now we're at a point, and again, this is something we've said many times on the show, where, oh, we don't need that anymore. Things were going fine. So why do we need all this? Well, because it was actually doing something. And so my point is just that we have been able to use tools of government to keep corporations in check and to make sure that those corporations are doing things that benefit the public interest at large. And this idea that the government has to take over companies is actually I see it as a distraction, because I do not think the left is interested in that, because we have all these other tools at our disposal, including making fucking companies pay their fair share of taxes. That would be the first place to start.
I mean, one of the articles that we didn't end up pulling for this discussion straight up says this is more akin to fascism than anything else.
Right.
Trying to wrestle control and get in bed with corporations as the government. I mean, that is more I sort of called it being a mafia boss, but I mean, in government systems, that's fascism.
Yep.
To give Democrats some small amount of credit, by the time this comes out, we're probably still under a government shutdown. And we're under a government shutdown because Democrats didn't just cave and have used this as an opportunity to message about how damaging the healthcare subsidies going away is going to be for everybody. It's a great time to get out a message about how bad things are. Now, need to come back and start positive messaging on what you want to do, instead of just, we won't be as bad. That's been the hang up for a long time. It's no, be good. Say what you're going to do that's good. Do stuff for people. Say what you want to do for people. And the difficulty of that, of course, is that this system has been captured by very rich people. And those Democrats, for the most part, are beholden to the same very rich people, donors, as the Republican Party. Democrats are not the left, but there are people in the Democratic Party who are on the left. Yep. Until and unless that is the driving force behind the Democratic Party, we're just paddling with one oar. We're just going in circles here.
And I would love to see, maybe they can't do it right now during the shutdown, but as part of this conversation about our healthcare system, let's talk about how the right has chipped away at the Affordable Care Act and given unbelievable power. The ACA did give unbelievable power to private health insurance companies. So why don't we talk about how we could fix it going forward, instead of just, again, the Band-Aid of, in this moment, we're in crisis because people are going to lose their subsidies. That is a crisis. That is super, super fucking important. But the next stage is, why are we in this situation? Why are we in a situation where people's premiums could go up by double just because of what party is in power in the administration? That's the next conversation. And then, yes, offering a positive vision of how that could be different going forward.
And the final article of the day from Current Affairs. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is not a socialist. And after taking a good long time to make fun of everyone, including Gavin Newsom, for calling Trump a socialist when he is absolutely not, as we've explained, the article goes on to explain what socialism is actually all about, saying, quote, "Socialism, real socialism, is something altogether different. There are many forms of it, from the friendly democratic socialism of a Zoran Mamdani to revolutionary Leninism and dozens of other isms in between. But all of them start from the principle that profit and private ownership of huge industries are not legitimate ways to run a society." I'm pausing for a second. I just want to point out, as I was making the argument before, we actually have really nuanced thoughts on this. Notice that they argued that private ownership of huge industries and running based on profit, like, we're not getting rid of the cobbler down the street,
Cobbler?
I said cobbler because I've been amazed to find cobblers in real life within the last couple of years. And I was like, holy shit, there are still cobblers? Yeah. And I think maybe that going back almost 20 years, listening to Tom Hartman, he's always used shoemaking as one of the examples of things he doesn't want the government doing. He's like, look, I want the government to run healthcare. I don't want them making your shoes. And yes, cobblers, they're still out there. So continuing, it says, "Socialism aims to eliminate the relationship between workers and owners that currently exists, the one where a tiny handful of people own and control everything, while most of us own nothing but our labor and have to sell that labor to the owners to stay alive." End quote. And then continuing, he's talking about how the misconception that Trump using the government to take ownership stakes somehow equates to socialism makes no sense at all if you understand the founding tenets of socialism, like what the aim is, as was just partly described. And so it goes on, quote, "The point is that government ownership in and of itself changes nothing about the employer-employee arrangement. It doesn't place any economic power into the hands of the working class. The working class, in fact, is nowhere to be found in Trump's alleged socialism. That's how you can tell it isn't really socialism."
Ding, 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 ding. That is the answer.
Yeah. I mean, I'll forgive people for the fact that the history of socialism is complicated. So it does take a bit of effort to understand, but everyone is at a huge disadvantage based on the fact that there is an enormous propaganda machine, both in, like private entities like the Cato Institute putting out information, but our standard educational system hasn't made any effort for decades to explain to people what socialism actually is or what it was, or that the Soviet Union called themselves socialist and were authoritarians, but that those are two separate things. And so they don't have to go together. But because we are still in the midst of a hangover from the Cold War, there is still that connection. People still think, oh yeah, socialism, I've heard of that. It's where the government owns everything and they're mean to the people, right? Like,
right.
But, when, to the best of my awareness, sort of off the top of my head, my understanding is that the revolutionary socialists who took over Russia and formed the Soviet Union knew that their goal was for the people, the workers, to own the means of production. And then they had to ask themselves the question, how do we logistically actually do that? And the answer they came up with, which is not the only answer, is, well, if the government represents the people and the government owns the businesses, then indirectly the people own the businesses. That was their rationale. It's not insane. It's not irrational. There is a degree of logic to it. It's just that it didn't work out in reality. Like things did not play out the way they imagined because that type of setup is how you end up with authoritarianism. So modern day socialists have learned from that. We understand that that is not the way to get the results you want. If you want the workers to own the means of production, as those revolutionary socialists did, then we should go about it a different way, like actually having workers within companies own those companies. Democracy at work, not an indirect Rube Goldberg machine of, well, we promise that we're representing the people, and so as the government will own it. And I mean, that's more Trump style, is like, well, we've taken ownership in Intel because it'll benefit the people. Oh, how? Shut up. That's how. You know, that is more akin to what ended up happening in the Soviet Union. They're like, we're going to do it for the benefit of the people. How's that going to work out? Don't ask questions. You know?
Step 3, profit.
Right. And then that's why we have something called democratic socialism. That's why Bernie Sanders is fundamentally different than what the Soviet Union did. And so, like, people not understanding that is frustrating. It's also understandable, but there's a huge propaganda machine that is helping bolster the idea, and up to and including someone who sees himself as a front runner for the Democratic Party, Gavin Newsom, playing into that bullshit by saying that, well, if government ownership is socialism, then I guess Trump's a socialist. Right. That's a big if. Rand Paul, libertarian in Congress, doing the same things. Like, well, if government ownership is socialism, then I guess what Trump is doing is socialism. Right.
If it was.
That's a big if. Yeah. If only that's what it was.
Yeah. So speaking of how the Russians call themselves socialists or whatnot, the other thing that gets mentioned a lot by a very uninformed right is that Nazis were socialists. Why? Because it said it in their party name. Hitler has said that he did that on purpose to fool people. It was a rhetorical trick. He wasn't accurately taking on that word and describing what they were going to do. He did it to fool people because socialism was very popular at that time and people were interested in that. That's why he did it. So no, the Nazis were not left-wing socialists. Like, that is not how that went down. And the other point is that after World War II, Europe established prospering democratic socialist societies. So the idea that everybody was opposed to socialism across the board is kind of silly. The only problem was we didn't get the universal health care and we didn't get the affordable housing rules and regulations. You know, like, we didn't get those things. And it's not that it's perfect. It's not that it's a utopia, but there are things that make quality of life better. And we didn't adopt them as a nation. And you can point to a lot of reasons why that was the case, but we didn't. And so now we are the ones who are struggling more so in a bizarre way. Even though we're quite wealthy and our standard of living is high, we are falling in comparison to the rest of the world, and we are unhappy, and our wealth gap is growing rapidly. So maybe, as Deon was saying, let us try to do just like a couple fucking things, you know?
We need to do a couple things, like, while we're explaining what socialism actually is, the spectrum, all those things, the mischaracterizations of it over time, we also need to attack, I think is the right word, the mythology of capitalism. Because I was having this conversation outside of this with a friend about what are they teaching capitalism is to kids now? Because I remember very distinctly capitalism, it fosters competition, it brings prices down, it makes everything better for everybody. No, it doesn't. Like, we've seen this. Nope, that's not what happens. It ends competition. It creates monstrously oversized companies that eat up everything. It raises prices. It creates intense wealth gaps because all the money keeps going up and up and up and up, and worker wages stagnate or get lower because the value of money keeps decreasing because there are people that are borderline trillionaires. And it doesn't seem to be making those people who have won the game of capitalism happier. I think that's another aspect of it that we need to talk about, because do Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Sam Altman seem like happy, well-adjusted people? Does it seem like all this money has made them have better lives, or does it seem like they're absolutely miserable? Because I think that's another aspect of this that we don't talk about, with what capitalism does to a society. It creates this dog eat dog mentality. It makes life harder. It makes things worse. And it makes the people that rise to the top either the worst people, or they were the worst people. That's why they rose to the top in the first place. And that system is anti-people. It's anti-humanity. And I think it's difficult. It's a big task to get people to get on board with that as what capitalism actually is, because we all have been sold a mythology of what capitalism is, and seeing the reality of it's going to be tough. But I don't think we should start with capitalism makes you evil, but I don't think it's far off. And I do think we need to start in tandem reestablishing what is socialism. Also, what is capitalism? Because you have to see the reality of the situation before you can actually fix the problem.
I totally agree with your point, but I think you're forgetting the fantasy we were sold and how we were introduced to capitalism, because it wasn't, oh, there's all these big conglomerates that are taking over everything. It's, there's a family that owns a bakery together, and this is how they sustain life.
Or a cobbler.
It is that, yeah. It's this very removed version of capitalism that, again, puts emphasis on the aspiring person versus the end result, which is a horrible system that just exploits everything, our earth, our people, our government, literally everything. So I agree with you, but I'm like, we have to cross so many bridges in education before we're ever going to be able to retell the story of capitalism as it actually is, instead of the fantasy that's still baked very much into the American way.
I wish that Americans knew more about soccer, what Europeans call football, because I was given such a great understanding of the life cycle of capitalism that you're describing, Erin, from, the baker and the cobbler and the end result of the conglomerates, from watching a documentary about how European football has progressed over the last 100 years. Because, every city has its own football club, and the ones that got good used capitalism to be able to reinvest and grow. And it was fucking great for their towns. And it really invigorated the towns and gave them, a lot of benefits. And then you fast forward 100 years, and those clubs are so big, they are taking over the towns. So at some point, growth becomes cancer. And we are at that point in a lot of different facets. And so using that story, that the documentary about about football was not making that point about capitalism, but they were sort of pointing specifically to well, this has gotten kind of dangerous, that these clubs are so big, so powerful, so profitable, that I think it was the documentary about the attempt to start the Super League. And long story short, it was basically well, we enjoyed playing fairly for a long time, but now we're so big. Can we just extract ourselves from the fair system and create a separate system just for the big rich teams so that we can make even more money? Well, what does that sound like? That doesn't sound like free, fair, rules-based free market capitalism. That sounds like the real world capitalism. That feels like once you get big enough, the rules don't apply to you capitalism, and you're going to take down whatever is around you at the same time because you can't be affected by anyone else. So that, as a metaphor for capitalism writ large, is, I think, quite apt, because when you're told the story of capitalism in the form of the baker and the cobbler, that's the good part. That's when it makes sense and is reasonable and rational, and there are genuine benefits, and the downsides are incredibly small. And so it does make sense to go down that path. It's just that you can't then be a staunch defender of capitalism at every stage, because it goes from being genuinely good to genuinely destructive about 100 years later.
Yeah. And that's, of course, unregulated capitalism, because over time we have chipped away at any regulation that would keep anything in check. And there was at one point in time more regulations and more controls, but they have used our system of money and politics and lobbying to, shake those all off, basically. Just the last quick point here. Like, it's no surprise that Donald Trump is our president and Donald Trump is trying to use authoritarian tools with corporations to feed his ego and also to be super powerful, because that is, like, I think we've talked about American culture many times before, but our culture is capitalism. That's it. Like, unregulated, souped up, now late stage, hopefully end stage capitalism. And he is the embodiment of all of that. Everything this country has become: extreme corporate greed, overlords first, everyone else, hey, have fun fighting over the crumbs. Like, he wants to be king because he has been in this country and been part of the elite class that has abused every attempt we have made to put power back in the hands of people. So it's not a surprise. I think it actually bothers me more than some of the other stuff how much he just is what we have become. He is such a representation. And, many say, well, you get the president you deserve. And maybe that's correct. But I think that his rise to power is our big blaring warning sign that we need to dramatically shift gears.
He's America's first perfect president.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely a mirror being held up to the country, and what most people are seeing is not good. Okay, so just to run down the solutions, help me remember if I'm forgetting any. Means of production owned by the workers, not primarily the government, as propaganda would have you believe. Although public enterprise does have its place, like Medicare, in correct specific market failures where people could buy in at the very least, fighting climate change, that sort of thing. And then public investment, again, not inherently good or evil, but incredibly important that things like that be democratically controlled, regulated, and safeguarded against corruption. Everything that is basically the opposite of how Trump is managing the state capitalism he's currently implemented. We would do it for the public good rather than strictly profit, and definitely not for his style of like self-aggrandizement. Did we solve it? Did I miss anything?
Oh.
I think it's solved.
Did it?
Check.
Excellent. All right, if you have anything to add, give us a call or send a text to 202-999-3991. Send an email to j@bestofleft.com, or you can reach us on Signal at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.